welcome Tuesday morning. Our Cockburn staff and volunteer kind of meeting, catching up and seeing what everybody's doing. I think the really interesting thing in this little bit is it's really about an introduction to the history of the Cockburn and the Cockburn archives. And one of the activities that we've been talking about for a bit is just how we can make the Cockburn's history a little bit more interesting and lively for people to kind of experience. And during the kind of lockdown, it's just a way to keep ourselves amused, or at least Ruby, kind of Doreen and kind of Anne, we've been doing some deep dives and spedunkling into the Scotsman archives and the kind of history of the Cockburn as reported in the kind of press. So maybe without any kind of ado, is we'll kick off this session with Doreen. You've been covering the early kind of part of the Cockburn's kind of history, and I'll just pass over to you if you want to take us through some of the things that you found.
What we've been doing is going through the Scotsman, through the ProQuest database system, and picking out items which relate to the Cockburn Associations from the time it was first founded. In fact, before that, to Henry Cockburn. The period we're looking at, or that I've been looking at, is the earliest period of the Scotsman, from 1817 to 1900. And there's actually a group of three of us going through the Scotsman and picking out relevant material. And what we're looking for really is the origins of the association and issues that the association was involved in. And the long-term plan is to have this information accessible to researchers who want to come into the Cockburn Association and use our archive, or who want to go online and find material relating to the history of Edinburgh's buildings and parks and gardens, and the kind of campaigns that the association has been involved in. So the association is named after Lord Henry Cockburn. He was a lawyer, a judge, the Solicitor General for Scotland from 1830 to 1834, and author of a number of works, some of them relating to Edinburgh and some biographical and legal. He was a lobbyist for Edinburgh's amenity, although the term lobbyist wasn't used then, I guess, an activist would be the term we might use now. And Cockburn Street off the Royal Mile was actually named in his honour. There was a need felt for an association of some kind to follow through on issues to do with the development of Edinburgh. And for a number of years, there were meetings and discussions about an association. And in 1874, the Cockburn Association was formed. This is a letter which the treasurer wrote to the Cockburn Association, wrote to the Scotsman, which gives a bit of information about the association. The membership, life membership, was £3, 3 shillings, and annual membership £5. Actually, probably a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult for people to pay than the current membership. They say the list of members comprises a goodly number of our best citizens in all classes. I suspect from reading it, actually, it was mainly the moneyed classes and the property classes who were the active members. Then it goes on to say we do not require much money. Well, nowadays, the association does require money, but at that time, of course, a lot of the activity was about writing letters, holding meetings. It was active, but not requiring the same resources as would be required now. Its aim was to secure the existence of a general intelligent attachment to what is essential to the city. So the wording has changed, but basically the same. And he ends up the letter by saying, thanks to the association, the amenity of the city is being a popular subject in the town council. The AGM in 1876 This is a report of the AGM in the Scotsman, and it said there were fair attendance, including a considerable number of ladies, which is interesting because they don't bother to record their names, but they were there. The association at that time had 235 members, and the annual report talks about the issues that they were involved in at the time. One of them is the Dinbridge Gardens, where the association had quite a major role, apparently, in getting gardens planted out to look attractive. Trees are an important issue right through these early years. And the Bruntsfield links and the Meadows were featured quite a lot in the early discussion and reports. And Princess Street Gardens was a major issue. So this is from 1828, and it records the appointment of Henry Cockburn as a police commissioner. And the Scotsman editorial says, "We hope Cockburn will avail himself of his new dignity to place the North Loch grounds on a right footing." Well, of course, there had been a loch in Princess Street Gardens, and that was drained because it was a cesspool, basically. And there was an issue of how do we use it. And Henry Cockburn was passionate about turning it into an attractive area. And they go on to say, "We know it is friendly to a broad straight walk with rows of trees in front of Princess Street." There was another issue in 1878, and that was about the proposal to put in an ornamental rock garden. And it's interesting that even a rock garden was regarded as not appropriate at that stage. However interesting in itself, it could not, it is thought, be erected on any prominent part of the present West Prince Street Gardens without detracting from their amenity. The charm of the gardens consists in their presenting in the midst of the city a considerable expanse of green areas ornamented by trees and capable of further ornamentation by means of flowers. And it will form a delightful promenade for the citizens and continue to be one of the most ornamental features of the city, so long as it is preserved as far as possible from the intrusion of erections of every description. There was also a big issue about the Waverley Market and its impact on Princess Street and the gardens. And of course, the market was a market as described, and there are articles describing how nice it is to see the market girls walking to the market with their heavy baskets of flowers and fruit, and how attractive the area looked. And of course, it was a major trading area. And then, of course, the railways came to Edinburgh, and they had proposals for a station and a proposal for a train to go through Princess Street. So there was a lot of opposition to the railways, and this article, which was actually taken from Cockburn, and these are Cockburn's own words, he says, "Those by whom or for whom the railways have been allowed to get into Prince Street Gardens will of course justify and affect to applaud that permission. The rest of the world is nearly unanimous in condemning it as a lamentable and irreparable blunder. It greatly diminishes the ornamental space, disturbs and vulgarizes what remains. It has introduced into the ground by far the worthiest in the whole city of protection parties who must always have a strong interest, hostile to all the interests of taste and recreation." There was a meeting of council in 1889, after the death of Lord Cockburn and many years later, and the council charged a committee which it appointed with the duty of protecting by every available means the destruction of the amenity of the city by the proposed railway. So it was still an issue. It runs right through to the turn of the century. There's a statement by the Cockburn Association itself in 1889. It was being accused of not doing enough, and this was a response where they said the association is procuring practical advice as to the effect which the proposed tunnel would have on the trees on the south side of the street. this prospect of the slightest injury to these trees ought to stir the citizens into action. And then in 1891, the Cockburn Association was concerned about the North British Railway scheme and was sending a deputation to the town council about the encroachment on the gardens by the company. So it's interesting that now you go through the tunnel in the train, and I always think, well, this is one, when I've been away from Edinburgh and come back, think what a wonderful view of the castle, but then it was just regarded as an intrusion on the gardens. And the other major area that's a subject of a lot of development issues in this period is the Meadows and the Bruntsfield links. And it's interesting that Cockburn, in his journal in 1843, is opposing a proposal to have the Hallows Fair on Bruntsfield links. And he says, "It's dreadful to think how precarious all the charms of Edinburgh are. Great regret was expressed at the council of the Cockburn Association that the fair had not been kept to its old site, the Colton Hill." The interesting thing is now is this is probably an example of, or one of the first examples of commercialisation, and the Henry Cockburn himself and then the association commenting on it. The Meadows was an area where people were concerned about overdevelopment, and they were investing £9,000 in destroying its beauty and the native country and the meadow look, and the planting of flowers that never bloom, really saying keep it as a meadow, and saying at the end, as many of these snippets in the Scotsman do, "Oh, for Lord Cockburn, if only he was." Again, another letter about Cockburn and the Meadows and Bruntsfield links. If Lord Cockburn had lived to our day, he would have had a good many fresh hints for spoiling the history of Edinburgh, and one of them, of course, was the meadow. And this writer was concerned with tastefully disposed clumps of shrubbery. Will our gardeners never learn that shrubs don't grow in our windy parks and squares, and they serve no purpose whatsoever excepting bits of rag, old newspaper and dust? The hollies in St Andrew's Square and Charlotte Square, to my personal knowledge, have not grown an inch for 40 years. Forest trees and green grass might surely content us, and both grow well. Still, everywhere is the cry for shrubs, and I even hear the pastoral character of Bruntsfield links is to be debased by a row of them at the south side. Well, the bushes may have grown in St Andrew's Square by now, but the types of issues addressed by Lord Cockburn and the Association in the 19th century continue to be addressed by the Association today. Thank you.
That's absolutely kind of fantastic, and how comforting history repeats itself, and also I guess how scarily so that it kind of does so as a result and continues around. That's a fascinating little kind of insight of just picking out some of the reports from the Scotsman from that kind of period. And there'd be many, many more campaigns ago. And strangely enough, I do confess, I feel like I'm that old boy who might have written that kind of letter way back at when, but maybe that's just how I'm feeling after about 80 odd days of lockdown from this kind of COVID thing on kind of Zoom. Any observations? Yeah.
It really shows that every battle has to be fought again and again and again. We could look through our history. So what Doreen's identified there are probably 4 battles that we're still fighting today over trees, over the park, over access to space, over the privatisation or commercialisation of public space. It's remarkable to see it 125, 150 years later that we're still fighting the same battles, but they still have to be fought by every generation.
Absolutely.
And interesting also in terms of green space, in the past people were calling not for just any green space, any tree, any shrub, but really a more natural green space, more it was more a call for a bit of the country and the city. It's similar to perhaps what we might talk about today in terms of biodiversity and meadow plantings as opposed to recreational grass. But it's just really quite interesting that artificial tree shrubs, clipped, contained, constrained, really didn't appeal to people in the past. What appealed was this more naturalistic aspect of city life, almost as a counter to the formal constructed aspects of the city, having this place to escape, place to recreate, full of life, full of colour, full of seasonality, the seasonal flowers, for example.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, that was a really kind of fascinating insight to just a really tiny kind of little bit. And another series that we'll kind of do in this, or another recording we'll do in the same thing, will be having kind of either Ruby or kind of Anne give a similar kind of little talk about that next period of the Coburn's kind of history, just into the kind of early 20th century and kind of beyond. And of course, what we hope to do with this in due course is to make it a much bigger part of the, you know, the Coburn kind of offer going forward. But I think just for this kind of time, Doreen, brilliant. That was kind of great stuff. Look forward for more of these stories kind of emerging. And we'll catch up with those next time around.